He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host Taylor, and today we're going to be taking a look at a couple of encounters. However, before we indulge in that, a couple of additional plugs. Last week, Reuben dropped a thrilling new comedic storytime episode with the assistance of ChatGPT. It is a dang good time. Additionally, we also had the opportunity to interview Ryan Willis from Sasquatch University. We discussed his organization, their new show that's coming out, and Bigfoot, and I highly recommend that episode. It was a great time. Lastly, we have the Las Vegas Aliens episode that dropped, where we cover and catalog the recent unidentified objects and sightings that have been unfolding in and around some of the American states as of late. And I believe that covers everything that's lately popping off on our feed. So without further ado, let's get into this. Firstly, titled The Vermont Humanoid. And I quote, "Okay, so I'll try to make this relatively short. So I'm not one for believing too much of cryptid lore. Never had an encounter before or anything like that, but my partner and I live on the border of upstate New York, not far from the Whitehall Bigfoot area. One night, partner was taking out the garbage and came back inside startled, and I mean really shook up. They said they had seen a creature that looked like maybe a fox or a coyote, but that it then stood up on its hind legs, and so they booked it back inside. Fast forward about a month, and I'm outside on my porch, smoking a cigarette, enjoying the stars under a crystal clear sky. We have a small plot next to our house that has a tow-behind landscaping trailer permanently parked on it about 20-ish feet away from the house. After a while of standing outside, I get the sudden and intense feeling like something is watching me. Just that primal feeling of danger. It should be noted that, like most people up here, I'm usually carrying a gun on me. Coyotes and bears are fairly common up here, so I kind of do the four corners check of my surroundings. When I looked over to that trailer, I saw there was something the size of a large dog laying in the grass. Mind you, it's a clear night with not quite full moon, and the grass was uncut, long, but not like a meadow. If I had to estimate, I'd say 7 to 9 inches high, so I had a really good view of this thing. Now, I know never to approach a random animal bedded down at night, so I just kind of watch it for a second. Even in the light of the moon, its outline and coat were pitch black, blacker than anything I've seen before, unnaturally contrasting against the ground it laid on. Then it looks up. It has piercing red eyes. I'm thinking, what the... And put my hand on my revolver. I ain't about to be coyote food. And then it stood up. It stood up on its hind legs. The only way I can describe the legs of it is that like a goat-human hybrid from the Narnia movie, but with a torso like a hybrid of a man and canine. It was taller than me, and I'm 6'1". It didn't even need to take a step. I flicked whatever was left of my cigarette back and moved away to the door. I locked and bolted it and spent the rest of the night wondering what I just saw. Now, I'll admit, I'm a religious man, but that thing didn't fit the description of any jinn I've heard of. It's to this day one of the few things in my life I cannot explain. We've installed security cameras since, but now the lot is under construction and we haven't seen it since. I don't know what I saw that night, truly, but I intend to find out one way or another. I want to go into the forest near the plot and look for signs. Does anyone have any advice on hunting this sort of cryptid? I'll update with any further happenings should they appear again. Now, end quote. I followed up and I was just trying to see if there's any additional information, and they weren't able to reveal anything. Nothing new and exciting, I should say, was occurring. This was the only occurrence. And I also want to thank you for allowing me to share this on the show. Now, so many encounters have that crescendo moment where they say, and I quote, that it stood up on its hind legs, end quote. That's truly the moment that things get a heightened level of intensity, because what you think you originally are looking at, that could be a dog, a bear, or another animal entirely, all of a sudden is snuffed out of reality by something that shouldn't technically exist in our own reality, by just appearing, standing upright, and walking like a human, or speaking like a human. Something our brain has been stripped of accepting or understanding. Again, I defer to society for that. We don't often hear our grandparents telling us about the woodbuggers anymore, because what used to be larger rural communities have now flipped into smaller communities and farms and out of city housing. And now the larger communities are in the cities and skyscrapers, etc. And with a change like that, you also see a large shift of information and how it's received and passed down. No longer through family experience, but more so through digital media. Now, before I keep rambling on, let's get back to this person's encounter. I also, again, just want to say, at first glance, 2 acknowledgements that this could be a Dogman. The mention of the fox or coyote-like appearance adds credit to such an assumption, but I don't want to necessarily dismiss the notion of them mentioning the way the lower half was like a Narnia creature, maybe like a goat man, an appearance resonating something from that Narnia movie. And again, I'm just going to kind of run with that a little bit, just to kind of see what we can kind of mix and match out of information. Now, Reuben and I have done a Goatman episode in the past, and I'll certainly admit they have become few and far in between in terms of sightings. Bigfoot I always consider at the forefront these days, Dogman following behind. Most people are taken aback when you mention Goatman, but there is a large humanoid bipedal presence that is obviously in upstate New York. And lo and behold, we have 5 glorious, densely forested areas east of Watertown. We have Five Ponds Wilderness, High Peaks Wilderness, West Canada Lake Wilderness, Black River Wild Forest, and Ferris Lake Wild Forest. So let's talk about these areas real quick, so we kind of have a lay of the land here. The Five Ponds Wilderness area is one of the few areas in the northeastern United States where old-growth forests can still be found. The area is extremely difficult to travel in due to the conditions, the bushes, the small trees, witch hobble. Witch hobble is just a very well-rooted plant. It's consistently known for tripping hikers. But many places in this area are seldom traveled, especially in the southeastern part of this wilderness. The terrain is low, rolling, and interspersed with many small ponds, swamp areas, and small brooks, numerous. And the forest covers a variety of pole-sized hardwoods that are just popping up everywhere in the sections. And now some of these sections were heavily logged or burned down roughly 40 years ago. But basically, a lot of this old growth is basically pines and spruce stands as well. So you have a whole good little mingling of these smaller trees going up to these old growth trees. It's a very nicely, again, remote area. Moving on, we have the High Peaks Wilderness area. Sadly, this place was subject to many forest fires near the turn of the century, destroying both vegetation and topsoil, leaving just bare rock behind. And it's still going to take many years before the soil develops and regrows again. However, the greater part of this area is dominantly forested with a mix of hard and softwoods. We also start to see higher elevations with mountaintops consisting of spruce, white, and yellow birch trees. And this is one of the more popular wilderness areas for tourists. In the summer, you can access hiking, backpacking, rock climbing, canoeing. Then in wintertime, you got ice climbing, skiing, snowshoeing, mountaineering. So some really, really good attractions. Next up, we have the West Canada Lake Wilderness. Devoid of many foot trail paths, it's labeled as one of the more remote areas in this region for hiking, with private lands to the north, east, and west. The terrain ranges from swamp flats and rolling hills to steep, rugged mountains, and the topography is gently rolling from west to east and rises from south to north. Most of the mountains are of moderate height, 2,000 to 3,000 feet in elevation, and this area is filled with a number of large streams, lakes, ponds, and wetlands. Many of the waters are pretty remote, though, and not easily accessed. Black River Wild Forest. essentially the tourist gateway into this overall forested region. In some respects, none of this area is remote. It is almost fully accessible by wheeled vehicles, and the entire area is richly populated with small lakes, ponds, several man-made ones. Some of the mountains on site, they aren't necessarily sitting at high elevations, but are still very popular lookouts. The southern region of this area also houses a few strips of very old growth just east of the Twin Lakes area. And finally, Forest Lake Wild Forest, the southernmost forest in relation to the other aforementioned ones, abundant in old growth spruce stands, numerous ponds, lakes, and streams. There's a good portion of this area dedicated to camping, snowmobiling, boating, and hiking. Albeit not as accessible as the previously mentioned area, it's still a very popular spot with motor access. All of these areas share similar ecosystems full of moose, black bear, beavers, coyotes, white-tailed deer, bald eagles, horned owls, turkey, and even the eastern bluebird. It's rich in wildlife. And much, of course, is found spread across these different regions, these different forests in this region. And together, this whole area forms part of the Adirondack Pack, which is part of New York's Forest Preserve in northeastern New York. This was established in 1892 to allow everyone to enjoy nature. Very similar to how a national park is, I dare say, as a preserve. The park's boundaries pretty much correspond with the Adirondack Mountains, which is the mountain range that is in there. And unlike most state parks, over 52% of the land is privately owned in holdings. 52%. Bear that in mind. Privately owned land. That sticks with me. But I have to remove my own bias as I discuss this. On another note, wilderness or wildlands, those titles refer to natural environments on Earth that have not been modified by human activity. Again, very nice for something to hide remotely, if I may say so. So now that we have the lay of the land, let's touch upon Goatman again here. For those unfamiliar with this cryptid, half man, half goat, many tales involving this cryptid can get convoluted and even more convoluted based on its origin stories in some cases. The woods of Maryland are usually associated with this cryptid going back as far as 1957, usually with hooves and the rear canine-styled legs like you see in a Narnia movie with the fawn that bend in the reverse. The upper part of this cryptid is more of a human. Some reports lesser hair, more skin, but then turning back into that goat form with its head covered in fur, often those prominent horns on the top. And of course, I did some research and wasn't able to find much on Goatman existing in upstate New York. So again, we can kind of use that as to funnel our direction here of what we're trying to deduce that this individual saw. Sasquatch certainly appeared in a few queries in upstate New York. A gentleman by the name of Jack Leach had an experience in the Black River Wild Forest area, actually. He got 15-inch foot sketches, of prints from that vicinity. And it's worth mentioning as well that the Canadian border is just along this upper area of the Adirondack Pack. Now, of course, Bigfoot wasn't the only possibly implied cryptid throughout the scenario. If I recall, like we were reading, it had very canine-like attributes. And after digging, New York is certainly a zone for Dogman. And that's why I'm going back and rounding off here, because I do think that this was a Dogman in this individual's experience. I found one brief encounter from nearby in this area where an individual was returning to their in-laws' house, driving by themselves along a dirt road. It was getting much later into the evening at this time when they spotted something sort of obscured and in the ditch in front of their vehicle. Now, this was off to the right side, and of course, it didn't really click in what they were seeing. Once the headlights got within adequate range of this thing, it propped up prominently and turned and just made direct eye contact with the driver. The driver at this point, pedal to the metal, gassed out of there. Like no tomorrow. But they did identify that this thing had a outline of a huge canine and was holding on to whatever it was eating in I'm assuming one of its claws. I'm not sure if it would be a paw or a claw, but in one of its grips. Notably, the fact that it was staring at the driver, even though the blast of the headlights were shining away at it, that's something I've heard in other reports as well. The driver did notice that this thing had very orange eyes. Now, jumping back to our encounter from earlier, reportedly red eyes, which is a common attribute usually affiliated with our more sinister acting cryptids out there. Bigfoot with bad intentions, I dare say, and your fair share of Dogman reports as well. So ultimately, what do I think this is? With the rarity of Goatman and the lack of sightings that would happen in upstate New York, I think we could rule that out. And I think that Narnia reference was just a reference to paint that picture of that lower half of this cryptid. I think that it's extremely similar to a Dogman, and that's what I believe that they had encountered and saw. And I'm glad that they are safe. Whatever it was doing there is obviously moved off. Maybe it's because it could identify that this person had a gun. There's a team in there developing the area. There's many factors that could push it away. So I'm glad that these individuals are safe, though. Now, moving on to our next encounter. This is maybe more along the lines of the paranormal to a degree, but still in line with that physical cryptid realm that we've discussed before in other episodes. Still quite startling. The original experience that started this conversation was about an individual's brother driving home one night and seeing something late during that drive. This prompted conversation about skinwalkers. Shortly after this experience in the woods near their property, they began to hear crying and calls for help. Now, a person's first instinct is to respond and help in the situation. And it's very important that you stop, take a deep breath, and just think rationally about it. And I'll touch upon that later, because what spreaded from this discussion was a very interesting encounter that I will detail now. And I just want to say thank you for allowing me to share it. And I quote, I lived in an incredibly wooded area in Oregon growing up. One night, I forgot to feed the dogs, so I had to go out at like 10:30 p.m. and get it done. Their cages were on the edge of the tree line. Our lab likes to escape his cage a lot, has separation issues, even if it's been 15 minutes being caged. I noticed he was working on separating the chain link in one corner. So I grabbed some tools and started fixing it. Hunched down, working with nothing but a flashlight on the edge of the tree line, I heard a little girl's voice crying and saying, "Help me," in a loud voice behind me. The crying continued after the words for a few more seconds. Normally something like that would alarm me and I'd snap into the rescue mode and start running towards it. Something about this felt off, though. Wrong. Chills ran through my body instantly, and I froze until the crying stopped. I felt almost paralyzed for a second. Once the crying broke, I took a second to wonder what the hell I should do and ran back into the house at full speed. Decided I shouldn't go in alone, so I grabbed a handgun and woke up my parents. Explained what just had happened. My stepdad also grabbed a pistol and a flashlight and went out. We hopped on an ATV and we went to every surrounding neighbor's house to make sure no children were unaccounted for. Then we and a couple neighborhood dads made a party line and walked through the patch of woods searching. Nothing at all could be found, making me look quite crazy both to my family and my neighbors. To this day, that voice repeats in my head sometimes and just creeps me the fuck out every time. End quote. Now, it's important to touch upon the term skinwalker. I do not mean the skinny humanoid entity, the pale walker, known by some, but the supernatural being rooted in Native American legend. With the ability to turn into any creature they so desire, including making sounds and noises that may resemble your loved ones, very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. The other scenario to this, and I'm following up what I alluded to earlier, is Bigfoot. Reports have come in where they make very inhumane but English-speaking vocalizations at people. And then, of course, you have cases where women are in remote areas, maybe a cabin up in Alaska, for example, where Bigfoot has been sighted. All of a sudden, they hear baby cries. They develop a sudden quick instinct to go and provide aid, just like our individual wanted to do in their encounter, hearing this individual call for help. But you have to remember that to put a pause on that and use your gut instinct and listen. This world is full of predators, some very real and some, in my humble opinion, very inhumane and dangerous. And they know how to draw you in. People want to be good. People want to help others. And it's that helping factor that is taken advantage of, that goodness inside us. A woman's natural motherly instincts, or a child's innocence and eagerness to provide aid to a fellow kid in need. Cryptid abduction, to me, is a very real thing. I understand not to everyone. It's a very situational thing. But for me, it is very real and is not to be taken lightly. So make sure the next time you are alone in the woods and you hear crying, you hear anything speaking, anything that you get the sense is inhumane, regroup with your family or friends. Recompose yourself, proceed with caution. In closing, if you've seen the Predator movies, you will know that they like to repeat voices, mimic that sound of your companions, your loved ones, etc. But ultimately, they want to lure you in so they can get you, just like many of our more sinister cryptid beings out there. I'm not trying to scare you. That's not my goal. And am I speaking with facts right now? Absolutely not. All I can do is take the information that other people have reported and put it on this platform for you. And that information is that sometimes there are dangers and we just need to take a step back and think it out, rationalize. With that, this episode is now concluded. Hopefully it didn't get too scary there. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Cryptid Clues. Be sure to check us out on our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. We're also on Patreon where you can get ad-free early episodes. So until next week, take care and stay safe.